Ladies and gentlemen, presenting Stoxpoker history, Collin Moshman's very first quiz video. We're going to be playing a couple of mid-high stakes heads-up matches today, and I'm going to try to put these quizzes on times when the play isn't just a matter of style, like a lot of our decisions will be, but where I feel that there's a very definitively correct answer. So let's do this. Oh, and the first we missed like two hands, which for some reason didn't record, but still 32. Not much has happened so far. And we have a pretty clear raise with a suited ace. If he checks, we bet. This is a paired flop, so it's pretty good to see bet because only 5 cards he can hold will connect with this, assuming he doesn't have a very unlikely pocket pair. He checks, I check behind because I've got some showdown value, and we have 4 outs to strong straight, so 3 flaws. We have a wheel. Okay, villain checks, and this is going to be your first quiz question. Do I check behind or do I bluff? Okay, I check behind. And the reason that you should check behind is because ace high has strong showdown value. And it's extremely rare in heads up that an ace high this doesn't figure to have a chance at showdown, because the only 2 hands out there, and a good high card just looks pretty good, particularly if the pot isn't very large. And if you were to bet that hand, it wouldn't be a bluff, and it wouldn't be a value bet. It would basically be a bet with no purpose. If he had you beat, he'd call, otherwise he'd fold, and that's a definite check. Okay, facing this min-raise, you can just call, you can 3-bet. Obviously you've got to play. No matter what the flop comes, we'll c-bet. And even with this monster flop, there's no reason to slow play. There are 2 high cards to a straight flush out there, and it may just make him more suspicious if we check. So we're just going to go ahead and bet that flop, just like we would any other. And that way also a bit less significant, but he can't gain any information based off of when we're checking, having 3-bet him out of position. Okay, this is going to be our next quiz. We've got pocket sixes, he limps. Should we check and take a free flop because this hand doesn't play too well out of position? Or should we go ahead and bump it up now because we have a strong hand? Answer, we raise. And that's because you want to be the aggressor in heads up. So if you've got a good hand and your opponent limps, you need a pretty compelling reason just to check. So I'd raise there with any pocket pair, any ace, pretty much any cards besides trash. And the only times not to do that is when your opponent is very loose and he's simply never going to fold to that pre-flop out of position raise. Then you would only raise out of position if there is strong value. Like 6s would be possible, a little iffy, but like obviously 8s or 9s would be way good enough. Suited queen is certainly strong enough to raise. Now, you can absolutely c-bet, and that would be my default play, to throw out a bet of maybe 60 or 70 here. I actually check behind, and I'll just do that occasionally to mix it up a little. And so this guy doesn't know with 100% certainty I'm going to c-bet, because that way he could check raise me with a strong hand and know for certain that he can win one more bet when I c-bet 100%. And another reason to throw out this kind of play occasionally is that it may even look more suspicious to your opponent if you're very aggressive, always c-betting, and suddenly you check. So it can be a little deceptive as well. And with 5-3, you could call, you could fold, you could do a lot of stuff here. And at this point, I'm absolutely not going to raise because I don't have a very strong hand, but getting better than 2-to-1 odds in position with a pair, I'm going to call. Okay, very bad turn. He fires another large bet, and this is definitely a time when you leave the pot. Calling or raising would be a pretty big mistake there, and you would only reconsider that if your opponent was reckless. Okay, it gives us a walk in the big blind, which is always fine, even with a relatively stronger hand. Very rare you don't mind getting a walk. Yeah, this is another one that can be raised. You could also raise this flop bet. I'm just going to call it. Now, when he checks behind, we've got two choices. We could either try to bet the turn and the river for value, and if he's got some kind of piece, like pocket sixes or the 5 or something, that's probably the best option. But if he's got nothing, then if we check behind, we can either value bet the river or he might bluff. So either approach is okay there. And if he checks, we'll bet. If he bets, we'll call. But if he bet there, we would not raise because we only get called with worse hands. And that's a good call on this part. It looks like we really don't have anything, so he can call with any. So here we flop bottom pair after making a slightly loose call with a 4-3, and we have a few choices now. We can either check bet out, and if we check, we can check raise, check call, or check fold. Well, with a pair, check folding is pretty weak here, and check raising commits a lot of chips, so we're going to bet right out. And one reason why you don't want to check call is because he could c-bet with any two cards, and then you really don't know where you stand. And since a pair is strong enough to call a bet, you're usually going to be better off just making one yourself. So rather than commit a lot of chips with a check raise or do something pretty passive like check call, we're going to go ahead and just lead right out. Now, when the turn comes, if it comes unfavorably, we're going to just be check folding. That's based on the fact that he's called this bet, and that indicates he likes the flop, and this is not a turn that's going to be very easy to bluff. It certainly hasn't helped our hand, so rather than commit a lot more chips, we're pretty much going to give up if he fires out a decent bet, and in that case, we can be pretty confident we're beat. Okay, so even 80, I don't think we're getting the odds for that, but we did everything we could there. Okay, this is pretty standard raise, and 7-9 is definitely strong enough to build the pot a little in position. And here you're at least going to call, and 7s are strong enough that I kind of like the 3-bet. So I'm bumping up to a little over 3 times his raise. You could also re-raise to around 240 there. And here we're just going to bet out. A lot of turn cards where they value our hand. And let me give you guys your next quiz here. You bet, and he re-raises. And if you were to re-raise here, he would either be shoving all in or making a pot committing bet. Would you be willing to call off the rest of the effective stacks, the rest of his 1273, with your mid pair in this position? Okay, the answer is yes, you should, because the only cards he's going to have that beat you here are a pair 8s or above, or a 10, and heads up, those are very rare from a hand combination perspective. If he were to raise a lot more often, he's going to have 2 unpaired high cards. And this would be a situation where if he re-raised all in, you should unhesitatingly call. Even against a relatively passive opponent, I'd be pretty inclined to call there. It would take a total rock before I consider folding. Okay, this is definitely a good board to bet at. The king is kind of a scare card, and if he stays in, you can unhesitatingly check fold. So you definitely want to c-bet on that king high board. And in this hand, we again make a slightly slim call with a very weak hand, but getting 3-1, you can certainly do that with a lot of hands and not make a big mistake. If you were to fold this, that would also be entirely fine. Now, the last time that we hit bottom pair, I really suggested that you guys bet out. Here you can bet out as well. And I think this time though what I'm going to do is check fold. And the difference here is that bottom pair is a lot likely to be good on a board that contains a face card, as well as a lot more draws than one with just a couple of mid cards. So my approach here is going to be a check fold. You wouldn't want to check raise still, it'd be too big a risk without a strong enough hand, and check call would still be passive. So if you didn't want to check fold, you could definitely lead out this flop. Okay, this river bet probably doesn't accomplish too much. It's trying to see a cheap showdown. I think actually the play I like a little more here is going ahead and betting that turn after he checks behind on the flop. Despite how draw heavy the board is, that definitely makes it a little more marginal. But it's not going to be too huge a difference in terms of value. And in this hand, when I fold the button, not something you want to do too often. But with this guy who's done it a couple times, maybe we can encourage him a little. We'll see. And notice that this time I elect to simply fold with a trash hand, the 10-3 offsuit, rather than see a flop. So it's certainly fine to do one and then the other. Okay, I'll come up and bump it up below with the 8 queen. And my next question to you guys is, I've got no piece of this board. Why did I just call this bet? Okay, the reason I call is because I'm getting really good odds, and I don't want this guy to think that a very small bet can take me off the hand. So if he checks again, I might be able to bluff him off or even showdown with the queen high. I have a couple of runner draws for the straight, and I'm just not going to be folding to a min bet any time that I raise before the flop. That bet, however, is clearly good enough for me to fold, and I'm pretty sure that this guy had a piece, probably the 3 or the 10. Okay, next question. What do we do here? Answer, 3-bet. Okay, ace queen is strong enough that no matter how loose this guy is, you're 3-betting for value. And again, I come out and I'm going to bet that for sure. And now kind of an interesting turn is going to fall. And my question to you guys now is, should you check now or should you bet? And what do you think? Okay, the answer is that you should bet, and the reason why you should bet is because there are 2 flush draws out, and you simply can't afford giving another card. So if any club or diamond falls, I can give him a flush, a 3 or a 5, put 4 to a straight on board, and if he's got any pair, he could be drawing to 5 outs for 2 pair or trips. And if you knew that this guy was hyper aggressive and always bet here, you'd be fine to find a check. But in general, well, you shouldn't be too worried about specific hands and heads up. This board is too draw heavy for you to check. So this may be a little extreme, the all-in, but you basically want to bet, and if it weren't an all-in, it would still be pot committing. So you're basically going to come out, and if it were a more raggedy board, you could certainly check. But with that many draws, you really should just go ahead and bet. Again, a smaller bet will work as well, but you shouldn't check and give him a free card in that spot. Okay, he raises to 4 blinds, and I'm just not interested in playing large pots out of position. Unless my hand is stronger than that. Queen 9 will come in a raise. He calls. And okay, so what I'm going to do here is, you could certainly bet, but I don't really want 3 bets in general to go into this pot. I think 2 bets is a better number. The only card that worries me here is an ace, and the turn, I think there's a good chance that he might bluff if he's missed based on me checking, and if not, I can value bet the turn of the river. I might get called by some weaker hands, like now a 5 or a 3. So I'm just going to call this bet, and the river, unless an ace falls, and possibly even then, if he bets, I'm going to call. If he checks, I'm going to bet. Okay, and here a lot of times he's going to show down with the 5, the 3, or the 8. Okay, he's got to have some pieces to be calling this, but he's not going to have the king. He's probably not going to have the queen. So this is a very common thing for the guy to be showing down with. So we'll call the min raise, getting decent odds, and just bet out like before because we don't want to have to see a turn. We kind of want to win immediately, but mid pair is too strong to abandon. So we just go ahead and lead right out there. And obviously I'm not going to call this bet, but I want to ask you guys a question. And this, I won't even quiz you guys on this, but what's more likely here, that he's got a real hand or that he's just doing this with kind of any cards? Well, the answer is that it's more likely he's doing this sort of randomly or maybe with a low pair because the last couple hands haven't been going too well for him, and you'll see this fairly often, particularly when the blinds maybe get a little higher and the guy's just kind of randomly going all in. Okay, so this is a hand where you can't check fold. You can either lead out, you can check call, you can check raise. Here, none of them are actually so bad, and check calling is normally kind of passive, but in this situation, you're not worried about too many cards, and okay. And now again, if you wanted to put them all in here, the only hands that he has that have you beat are an 8 or a king. And you could do that. What I'm going to do here, though, is make a smaller raise intending to fold to an all-in 3-bet. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think that the hands that he would call if I shoved and the hands that he would 3-bet all in are basically identical. So in other words, he's going to 3-bet all in probably a king or an 8, just as he would call if I myself were to raise all in. So I think I'm going to win it pretty much equally when he doesn't have anything and save myself some chips when he has me beat. And this particular hand, so it doesn't work out, is again more of a matter of style, and I think there are a few lines that would work about equally as well there. Okay. So I'll raise a mid offsuit queen, he checks, and I'm going to c-bet. Now I'm pretty much done with the hand. Certainly when he goes all in. And having missed this with just a gut shot, I'll check fold. You wouldn't want to check call there with a pretty weak draw. You could lead out. That would be fine if you wanted to bet like 75 or check fold. You don't want to check raise or check call there. Okay, ace 3 is good enough to raise. He folds. Okay, with queen king, normally you would 3-bet, and in this case I'm just going to call because if I 3-bet, then I'm pretty much playing a very big pot, and I'm kind of committing myself to a showdown almost no matter what hits. So I think I can outplay this guy, and I'm just going to see a flop here. If you want to 3-bet him, that's fine. And I'll go ahead and check this. We've missed. It's one that could hit his range. And when he checks behind, though, you've got to fire. And why is that? Why, when you check behind, you check, your opponent checks, why do you have to fire the turn? Okay, the answer for that is when your opponent is showing weakness in heads up, you really need a pretty compelling reason not to bet. And there, he checks behind the flop. If he had any piece of that kind of low coordinated bird, he'd very likely bet, and that's a very good time to bet. With 2 high cards, you could also improve to the best hand. Okay, this is certainly a good board to semi-bluff. And one great thing about making a small bet on a board with ace high is guys will often fold a lot of hands because they're usually representing a hand where if you actually have it, you're beating even hands that they're drawing to. Okay, so normally if the board comes like 10 high and they've got Jack King, then they think, well, okay, even if he's got a pair of tens, I've got two overcards I'm drawing to, but that's not the case when the ace hits. Okay, if you actually have it, then he's just drawing to the worst hand. Okay, and what is our best play here? Should we check or should we raise? Okay, the answer here is that a mid king is pretty strong, and you should go ahead and raise that. King 8 is definitely a strong hand heads up, and we've seen him before fold to some of our button limps, so he's definitely capable of limp folding. So you should take the initiative, particularly against an opponent who is capable of folding to this bet, and when you have a strong hand, and go ahead and raise. Okay, so here we've got a bet. Our hand is vulnerable, and he's probably not going to give us too much credit. And now he goes all in, and my question to you is, what is our thought process at this point? Okay, the answer is that we gladly call. And from a hand combination perspective, it's very unlikely that he has a 10 or another 8. In fact, with a 10, he would often slow play by just calling here, and he wouldn't raise. And he probably would have raised a pocket pair himself. So it's very, very likely in this situation that your opponent is going to have two overcards. So here he has Jack Queen, and that's actually, it's not such a bad semi-bluff, because not only do both of his overcards figure to be good, but he also has a gut shot straight draw, and he's got what appears to be a good amount of fold equity, so this is not a bad play on our opponent's part at all, but this is a situation where we gleefully